I was never afraid of the dark. As a child, I found it comforting, like a soft blanket that wrapped around me, concealing the world's mysteries and dangers. But the darkness I faced before waking into my new life was unlike any I'd ever known. It was deep, endless, and silent, with no stars or glimmers of light. I drifted in it, feeling both aware and unaware, my thoughts slipping in and out of consciousness. For the longest time, I wasn't sure if I was sleeping or dead. Then, as if the world decided it was time for me to return, I felt the faintest tug, pulling me up. I resisted, not out of fear but because I had grown accustomed to this weightless, timeless state. But the tug grew stronger, and then there was a piercing flash, a light that shattered the dark and burst into every corner of my being. It was as if I'd been plunged headfirst into a pool of blinding sunlit water, the brightness all-consuming and overwhelming. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped softly around me, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. The light streaming in through the window was sharp and painfully bright. My head throbbed with a dull ache, and my body felt heavy, almost foreign. I tried to sit up, but my muscles resisted, stiff from disuse. A nurse entered the room, her face a mask of practiced calm and warmth, though I could see a flicker of surprise as she noticed my eyes open. "You're awake," she said, her voice gentle yet edged with awe. "Welcome back." The words hung in the air, strange and unsettling. Back from where? I wanted to ask, but my throat felt raw, my voice non-existent. Instead, I blinked slowly, as if that simple act would bring clarity, yet all it brought was more confusion. Bits and pieces of a life flitted through my mind, but none of it felt whole. Faces, laughter, and places I couldn't name rose up, then faded away before I could hold on to them. In the days that followed, I learned that I had been in a coma for months after a terrible accident. The doctors, who had once seemed certain of my fate, were shocked by my return. They spoke of miracles and resilience, but I felt none of it. The life I had supposedly returned to was a blank canvas. My memories were fractured, like shards of a broken mirror that no longer fit together, and as much as I tried, I could not make sense of the reflection. A gentle older woman named Dr. Reyes came to see me every day, her voice soft as she asked questions, guiding me back to what she hoped would be my memories. She showed me photos, shared stories, and tried to coax any flicker of recognition. But no matter how hard I tried, those faces and names felt like strangers. The life she described sounded beautiful and full: friends, family, laughter, and love. And yet, the emotions tied to those memories were absent. I could understand the concept of who I had been, but I could not feel it. One night, as I lay in the stillness of my hospital room, I dreamed. It was the first dream since I'd awoken, and in it, I was somewhere vast and open, under a sky that stretched endlessly above me, filled with stars I felt I had known all my life. A man stood beside me, though I couldn't make out his face. We held hands, our fingers intertwined, his touch warm and familiar. I felt a love so deep that it almost hurt, a fierce sense of belonging that made me want to stay in that moment forever. But then, just as quickly as it came, the dream faded, slipping away like sand through my fingers. I woke up with tears in my eyes, my heart aching with a loss I couldn't place. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the moon through the window, casting soft shadows across the walls. I stared at the ceiling, a strange emptiness settling over me. Who was he? And why did I feel as though I had left a piece of myself behind in that dream? The days that followed were filled with small steps toward recovery. I learned to walk again, my muscles regaining their strength slowly but surely. Nurses and doctors marveled at my progress, calling me the miracle patient, but each smile and congratulatory word felt hollow. To them, I was returning to something. To me, I was beginning a life from scratch. One afternoon, as I sat by the window in my hospital room, I saw a couple walking outside. The man held the woman's hand tenderly, his gaze on her filled with such love and adoration that it made my heart clench. I recognized that look, though I couldn't say from where. It was like déjà vu, a moment replaying itself from somewhere deep within me. I felt an ache that went beyond sadness. It was a yearning, a longing for something I couldn't even name. In time, I was discharged from the hospital and placed in a small apartment, arranged by a program that helped patients like me reintegrate into the world. My new life was quiet, punctuated by routines and therapy sessions. Dr. Reyes continued her visits, her unwavering optimism a small light in my otherwise muted existence. I knew she meant well, but there was an unbridgeable gap between us. She spoke of reclaiming my past, of rebuilding who I had been. But I wasn't sure I wanted that. I didn't feel like the person she described. I felt like someone else. As the weeks passed, I tried to find a rhythm, a sense of belonging in this life I had stumbled into. But there was an emptiness within me, a hollow space that no amount of activity or conversation could fill. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I would sit by the window, watching the world move on without me, and I would remember that dream. The warmth of that man's hand, the feeling of being known so deeply, it haunted me, lingering like a shadow in my mind. One evening, while flipping through a stack of books given to me by a nurse, a photograph slipped out from between the pages. It was old, slightly faded, showing a man and woman standing under a tree, laughing together. The woman looked happy, carefree, her face radiant. And the man beside her, something about him felt familiar, though I couldn't say why. A chill ran through me as I stared at his face, a feeling of recognition blossoming within me like a memory just out of reach. My heart thudded in my chest, and for the first time since waking, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't contain. I didn't know who he was or why he seemed so familiar, but in that moment, I knew he was part of the life I had left behind, a piece of the puzzle I was missing. The photograph slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor as I sat there, my mind racing, my heart pounding, wondering who I truly was and what my place in this world could possibly be. Months passed, and I learned to navigate my new life with a sense of routine. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but there was a feeling within me, as if I were holding onto the edge of a memory that refused to fully reveal itself. I spent my days attending appointments, reading, or walking through parks that were familiar yet foreign. Dr. Reyes encouraged me to seek out new connections, urging that people often help us find ourselves in unexpected ways. It was during one of these walks that I met him. The day was overcast, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of rain through the air. The park was mostly empty, except for a man sitting on a bench, reading a worn paperback. He looked up as I passed, his eyes warm and inviting, a quiet friendliness in his expression that felt strangely familiar. I hadn't planned to stop, but something in his gaze drew me in. He gave a small smile and, gesturing to the empty space beside him, said, "You look like you could use a rest." There was a kindness in his voice, a softness that made me feel as if I had been seen for the first time in ages. Without thinking, I took a seat beside him. We sat in silence for a few moments, both watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. I found myself strangely at ease, the usual tension in my chest loosening. Eventually, he introduced himself as Daniel, and we fell into a conversation that flowed effortlessly. We talked about books, the park, and our love for quiet places. He had a gentle laugh, a sound that made the world seem softer, as if his presence dulled the edges of everything harsh. Over the following weeks, I found myself visiting that park more often, hoping to see him again. Daniel became a small beacon in my life, a source of warmth that cut through the lingering chill of my loneliness. He was easy to talk to, never pressing, always letting the conversation flow wherever it wished to go. We shared coffee on rainy days and walked along winding trails when the sun peeked through the clouds. I began to feel something stir within me, a hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel since my awakening. Daniel was patient, kind, and attentive. He asked about my life, and though I couldn't offer him much, he listened without judgment. I told him about the emptiness I sometimes felt, the way my memories seemed to linger at the edges, taunting me with glimpses of a life I couldn't recall. He would nod, his gaze steady and understanding, never interrupting, simply holding space for me. He once told me, "We don't always need to remember everything to know who we are. Sometimes, who we are is found in the moments right in front of us." It was during one of these quiet moments together that he reached for my hand. The gesture was small, a gentle, hesitant brush of his fingers against mine, but it felt like something monumental. My heart skipped, a warmth spreading through me that I couldn't explain. His touch was grounding, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to cling to the past to feel whole. We stayed like that, our hands entwined, watching the world move around us as if we were the only two people in existence. As our connection deepened, so did my feelings for him. I found myself smiling more often, laughing freely, and feeling a lightness I hadn't known was possible. My days were no longer empty but filled with quiet moments of shared laughter, lingering glances, and conversations that seemed to reach into the depths of who I was becoming. It felt as if Daniel was slowly helping me build a new foundation, piece by piece, a place where I could truly belong. One evening, we sat beneath a sprawling oak tree, the air filled with the rich, earthy scent of rain-soaked leaves. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something tender and unspoken. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that no matter what memories come back, or if they don't, I'll be here. I'll be here for whoever you choose to be." A lump rose in my throat, and I could only nod, my emotions too tangled to express. His words felt like a promise, a vow spoken from the depths of his heart. In that moment, I realized how deeply I had fallen for him, how his presence had become a lifeline, grounding me in a way I hadn't thought possible. Not long after, Daniel proposed. It was a simple moment, a quiet question asked in the park where we'd first met, beneath a sky painted with the colors of twilight. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate plan, just a heartfelt promise that we could face whatever the future held, together. My answer was immediate, instinctual. "Yes," I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Yes." Our wedding was modest, a small gathering beneath the open sky with only a handful of close friends. Daniel held my hands, his gaze unwavering, and as he spoke his vows, I felt an overwhelming surge of peace. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by the shadows of my past. I felt whole, present, and alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. Standing there with him, I realized that perhaps this was the life I was meant to have all along, a life not burdened by memories I couldn't reach but filled with moments I was living fully. As the weeks turned into months, we settled into a rhythm, a life built on simple joys and quiet love. We filled our days with laughter, shared dreams, and the kind of trust that grows slowly but roots itself deeply. My past, the hazy memories of another life, began to feel like a distant echo, something that belonged to a different person. My heart was here, in the present, in this life I had chosen. One night, as we sat together by the fire, Daniel wrapped his arm around me, his warmth comforting against the cool night air. I rested my head on his shoulder, content in a way that I hadn't known was possible. "Do you ever wonder about your past?" he asked, his tone gentle, his curiosity tinged with understanding. I thought for a moment before answering, tracing small patterns on his hand. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But the need to know has faded. I don't feel lost anymore. Whatever happened before, it feels like another lifetime. I think I've finally found where I belong." He squeezed my hand, a soft smile on his face. "Then that's all that matters." As I drifted to sleep that night, nestled in his embrace, I felt a peace unlike any I had ever known. My heart, once hollow and filled with questions, now felt full. I realized that life had given me a second chance, a rebirth not only of body but of soul. And in Daniel's arms, I found a love that was wholly new, a love that belonged only to this life, this version of me. Autumn arrived in vibrant splashes of amber and crimson, leaves swirling down like embers drifting from the trees. Life with Daniel felt perfect, our days filled with quiet joy and moments of shared laughter. I had long since settled into the comfort of our love, the haunting echoes of my former life dimming to nearly nothing. Each day, the past faded further, replaced by a peace I hadn't thought possible. One evening, Daniel suggested attending a local art exhibit. The night was cool, and we strolled hand in hand, a sense of light-hearted excitement between us. The gallery buzzed with low murmurs and soft jazz music, its walls adorned with vibrant paintings and striking sculptures. I felt a thrill as we walked through the crowd, pausing here and there to admire the art. It felt like an affirmation of our life together, exploring new experiences, discovering beauty in unexpected places. As we moved through the gallery, I became aware of a lingering gaze. It was a strange sensation, like being drawn into a current I couldn't resist. I looked up and saw him. He stood across the room, watching me with an intensity that made the breath catch in my throat. A man in his mid-30s, tall and composed, dressed in a dark suit that seemed as carefully put together as his expression was undone. His gaze was fixed on me, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something raw that I couldn't quite place. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. Everything around us dimmed, the soft conversations fading to nothing, the gallery lights blurring as my vision tunneled. There was an inexplicable familiarity in his eyes, a sense of recognition so deep it felt like a physical force, drawing me to him. My heart raced, a strange, uncomfortable flutter that made my hands tremble. Who was he? Before I could make sense of the moment, Daniel turned, following my gaze. He noticed the man and must have sensed the strange connection in the air because his grip on my hand tightened. Concern flickered in his eyes as he glanced back at me, and I forced myself to shake off the feeling, smiling at him as if nothing was amiss. But the man didn't look away. His gaze stayed locked on me, as if he were trying to reach into my soul, to uncover something hidden deep within. I felt myself falter, my heart pounding as fragments of memory brushed against the edges of my mind. Images flashed briefly, like a film reel playing snippets of a life I could almost recall but couldn't truly see. I took a shaky breath, gripping Daniel's hand tighter, grounding myself in the familiar warmth of his touch. The man finally approached, his steps hesitant but deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for some trace of recognition. It really is you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet filled with a weight that sent a chill through me. I struggled to find words, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. The world seemed to hold its breath around us, the noise and motion of the gallery fading into the background. I could feel Daniel beside me, his tension palpable, yet I couldn't tear my gaze from the stranger before me. He took a deep breath, his face etched with a raw vulnerability that made my heart ache. I thought I'd lost you forever," he murmured, as if the words were meant only for himself, a confession that slipped out before he could stop it. Confusion clouded my mind, a thick fog obscuring everything except the intensity of his gaze. I wanted to ask him who he was, how he knew me, but the words wouldn't come. Memories tugged at me, insistent whispers that seemed just out of reach, and I felt a surge of frustration mingled with a strange, unexplainable sadness. Daniel shifted beside me, his voice calm but edged with a protective firmness. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe we know each other," he said, his tone polite yet with an underlying note that made it clear he wanted this stranger to back off. The man's gaze shifted briefly to Daniel, a flicker of pain crossing his face, but he quickly returned his focus to me. "You don't remember me, do you?" His voice was quiet, almost defeated, and I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to comfort him, a reaction that startled me. I don't know," I finally managed, the words barely more than a whisper. My voice trembled, my heart racing as fragments of something, images, feelings, half-formed thoughts, surged through me, only to fade before I could make sense of them. The man took a step back, his expression a mixture of sadness and acceptance, as though he had braced himself for this moment but hadn't fully prepared for the impact. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice soft and filled with a sorrow that seemed almost tangible. I won't disturb you any further." With one last, lingering look, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The spell broke, the sounds and lights of the gallery returning with an almost jarring clarity. I blinked, disoriented, struggling to process what had just happened. Daniel turned to me, his expression filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle as he placed a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the strange ache that lingered, an emptiness that felt raw and exposed. "I don't know. I think I need some air," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. We stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing against my flushed skin. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind, but the encounter left me shaken in a way I couldn't explain. Daniel wrapped his arm around me, his presence comforting, yet I felt a strange sense of guilt tugging at me. I wanted to forget the man's face, his words, the way he looked at me as if I were someone precious he had lost. But the memories continued to tug at the edges of my mind, fragments of a past life that refused to be silenced. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Daniel, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body anchoring me in the present. Yet my mind drifted to the man in the gallery, his face etched with sorrow and longing, his words echoing in my mind. I thought I'd lost you forever. Who was he? Why did his gaze feel so familiar, so heartbreakingly familiar? I tried to dismiss the thoughts, focusing on the life I had now, the love I had found with Daniel. But a part of me, buried deep within, seemed to remember something, some unspoken promise, a connection that had once been everything. The ache remained, a subtle yet constant reminder of a life I could almost reach but not quite touch. The days passed, and I tried to return to my routine, immersing myself in the life Daniel and I had built together. But I couldn't shake the encounter, the lingering sense that a piece of my soul was reaching for something beyond my understanding. Each night, as I lay beside Daniel, I felt the pull of that other life, a whisper that refused to be silenced. Though I loved Daniel deeply, there was a part of me, small and silent, yet insistent, that yearned for answers, for a truth buried somewhere in the shadows of my lost memories. And as much as I tried to resist, I knew that eventually, I would have to confront the ghosts of my past, to seek out the life I had once left behind, even if it meant unraveling everything I had come to cherish. The encounter at the gallery haunted me, lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. The stranger's face would flash in my mind at unexpected moments, his words echoing through my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to forget. I continued my life with Daniel, clinging to the comfort and love we shared, but a restless ache grew within me, a need to understand the past I had lost. My love for Daniel was real and unwavering, but something about that encounter stirred a deep, unresolved part of me that refused to be silenced. One afternoon, after weeks of trying to ignore the pull, I finally gathered the courage to speak with Dr. Reyes. Sitting in her office, I found it difficult to find the right words to describe the emptiness that had crept back into my life. She listened intently, her kind eyes soft and understanding, as I recounted the meeting with the stranger, the strange familiarity in his gaze, and the memories that continued to slip just beyond my grasp. "It's not uncommon," she said, after a thoughtful pause. "Sometimes, when pieces of our past resurface unexpectedly, they can stir powerful emotions we don't fully understand. It sounds like this man triggered something deep within you, something tied to the memories you've lost." I nodded, frustration building in my chest. "But why now?" "I thought I was moving forward, that I was leaving that life behind." "Perhaps you were never meant to fully leave it behind," Dr. Reyes replied gently. "The past is a part of who we are, even when we can't remember it clearly. Maybe this is your mind's way of telling you that there are things left unresolved." Her words struck a chord, resonating with the unspoken tension that had been building within me. I had spent so much time trying to embrace the present, to find peace in my new life, that I hadn't allowed myself to wonder about the person I once was. That evening, as I returned home, I felt the weight of those unresolved questions pressing down on me. I loved Daniel deeply, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something crucial was missing, a part of myself that had been left behind, waiting for me to reclaim it. The next morning, I told Daniel about my decision. We sat together on the couch, the early morning light casting soft shadows across his face. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the silent plea that I would reconsider, but he listened quietly as I explained my need to understand the life I had forgotten. "I don't want to leave you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep pretending that this other life, these memories, that they don't matter. I need to know who I was, who I left behind." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I understand," he said, his voice steady but tinged with pain. "If this is something you need to do, then I'll support you. I just want you to come back to me." Tears welled in my eyes, and I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I will. I promise." But as I said the words, I felt a surge of doubt. I didn't know what I would find, or if I could truly return unchanged. I only knew that I couldn't ignore this part of myself any longer. With Daniel's reluctant blessing, I began my search. I reached out to Dr. Reyes for guidance, and she connected me with resources that might help me trace my past. It felt like diving into a dark, unknown pool, my mind a blank slate waiting to be filled with fragments of memories I had once lost. Days turned into weeks as I pored through records, old photographs, and hospital reports. Every small detail I uncovered was like adding a brushstroke to a blurred painting, the image slowly coming into focus. One evening, I found myself sitting in a small cafe, going over hospital records when a familiar face caught my eye. It was him, the stranger from the gallery. He hadn't seen me, and for a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should turn away and leave. But something in me wouldn't let go, the pull too strong to resist. I gathered my courage and approached him, my heart pounding. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes widened in disbelief, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "You came," he murmured, as if he couldn't believe it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I need answers," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Who are you? How do you know me?" He gestured for me to sit, his gaze never leaving mine. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We were married, before the accident. Before everything changed." The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into me as I tried to process them. Married. Ethan had been my husband, my partner in a life that now felt like a distant dream. I searched his face, looking for some flicker of memory, but all I felt was an overwhelming sadness, a sense of loss that went deeper than words. "I don't remember you," I said softly, the confession cutting through me. "I'm sorry, but I don't feel anything." Ethan's expression faltered, his pain visible. "I know," he replied, his voice strained. "But I had to see you, even if you couldn't remember. I spent so long hoping that you'd come back, that we'd find a way to rebuild. But seeing you now, I know that the person you once were is gone." The words stung, and a lump formed in my throat. "I've tried to move on, to build a new life," I said, almost pleading with him to understand. "But there's this emptiness in me, this feeling that something is missing. I thought meeting you, understanding who I was, might fill that void." Ethan nodded, sadness etched into his features. "Maybe we were both holding on to something that was never meant to be. I can see now that you've become someone new, someone I don't know. And maybe that's all right." A silence fell between us, thick with unspoken regrets and lost dreams. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of grief for the life we had shared, a life I could never fully remember. But alongside that grief was a strange sense of peace, an understanding that this meeting was necessary, not just for me but for both of us. After a long pause, Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet but steady. "I'll always love the person you were. But I think it's time I let her go." I nodded, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. I reached out and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Ethan. For everything." As we parted, I felt a quiet sense of closure, a door closing on the past, finally allowing me to step fully into the present. Returning to Daniel was like coming home. I walked through the door, my heart full of everything I had discovered, the person I had left behind, and the life I had chosen to embrace. Daniel met me with open arms, holding me tightly as if he could sense the shift within me. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice full of certainty. "I'm finally here, with you." And in his arms, I felt whole, no longer tethered to a life I couldn't remember, no longer searching for pieces of a past I had already left behind. The love I felt for Daniel was real and unbreakable, and for the first time, I was ready to live fully in the life we had built together, free of ghosts, grounded in the present, where I truly belonged. The air was crisp, carrying the gentle scent of fallen leaves and the distant sounds of laughter as children played in the park. Daniel and I strolled hand in hand, our steps in rhythm, as if moving to some silent song only we could hear. It had been months since my encounter with Ethan, and though fragments of my past would still surface at unexpected moments, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known before. My journey into my forgotten life had lifted a weight from my heart, allowing me to embrace the here and now with Daniel fully. As we walked, Daniel's hand tightened around mine, and I glanced up to find him watching me, a gentle smile in his eyes. There was something in his gaze that made me pause, a quiet intensity that spoke of all the words left unspoken between us. I had come back to him after my search for answers, and though he had supported me, there had always been a lingering uncertainty in his expression, a question he hadn't dared to ask. But now, that uncertainty was gone, replaced by something deeper, something I felt reflected in myself. We stopped at a small, secluded bench beneath an old oak tree, its branches stretching out like protective arms. Daniel sat down, pulling me close beside him, and for a moment, we simply enjoyed the peaceful silence, watching the leaves drift lazily to the ground. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice soft yet filled with emotion. "I was afraid," he admitted, his eyes focused on the horizon. "When you went searching for your past, I was terrified you'd find something there, something that would make you want to leave." His words surprised me, though they echoed a fear I had carried myself.